My house has always been my fortress. I remember the first time Vivian and I saw it. An unremarkable one-story house on Fairview Avenue in Baldwin Park, with peeling paint and an overgrown garden. Other buyers wrinkled their noses, but Vivian grabbed my hand and whispered, "Ebner, this is our house." And she was right, as always. It was 43 years ago. I had just gotten a promotion at the construction company, and we could finally afford something more than a rented apartment. Austin was only 5 at the time, and he ran around the rooms imagining it was a castle and he was a knight. Funny how quickly kids grow out of their fantasies. Vivian passed away 7 years ago. Cancer. She faded slowly, and I saw every stage of that agonizing process. After she died, the house got too quiet. You know how it is. You get used to someone always being around, and then that person disappears, and all that's left is an echo in the empty rooms. Austin came to the funeral with Trixie and little Lilith. They stayed for 2 days and then hurriedly returned to their lives. Work doesn't wait, Dad, you understand. I do. Always understood. Maybe a little too well. I'm 75, but I'm not out of my mind yet, though Trixie often looks at me like I've already got 1 foot in senility. I notice those looks when I go over to their house for dinner once a month. She thinks I don't see the way she rolls her eyes when I talk about my bridges. Bridges have been my passion. 40 years I've been designing them, watching my blueprints turn into mighty structures of concrete and steel. People crossed rivers and gorges based on my calculations, not even realizing that every girder, every bolt had been carefully calculated by a man named Ebner Hobbs. Austin was never interested in my work. To him, it was something boring and archaic. He chose finance, fast money, prestige, an office with a view of the city. I stayed out of it. Perhaps you should have. The pension turned out to be nothing like I'd imagined. Sure, I had plans. Traveling with Vivian, maybe writing a book on bridge building. But Vivian didn't live to see it, and the book remains a stack of notes in a desk drawer. Instead, I wake up every morning in an empty house, have a cup of coffee on the porch, and watch cars go by with people hurrying somewhere. They have a purpose. I have only memories. Sometimes I call Lloyd, my old co-worker. He's the only one who still remembers when we used to argue hoarse about load-bearing structures and proofread blueprints late into the night. We meet once a week at a small coffee shop on the corner of Main Street. He still advises young engineers despite his 78 years. "Gotta keep your brain sharp, Abby," he says, calling me a nickname I can't stand and which he uses for that very reason. Austin started talking about the house about a year ago. At first, it was just questions. "How do you cope with such a big house, Dad? Isn't it hard for you to clean? Have you thought about moving to a smaller place?" I guffawed, saying I wasn't so decrepit that I couldn't handle a vacuum cleaner. But the questions got more and more persistent. One day, they arrived unannounced. Austin was in his best suit, Trixie in a dress that must have cost like a month's pension. Even Lilith was brought in, though she was clearly uncomfortable. "Dad, we want to have a serious talk," Austin began, settling into the chair that had once been Vivian's favorite spot. He always did that, taking up space that didn't belong to him with the confidence of a man who believed the whole world was made for his convenience. Trixie sat down next to him, placing her hand on his knee, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but seemed contrived. Lilith remained standing by the door as if ready to run away at any moment. "Trixie and I have been thinking about the future, about your future, about our future," Austin continued in the tone he used for presentations to clients. "This house, it's too big for you alone, and it's getting more and more expensive to maintain, right?" I didn't argue, even though the house wasn't that big. 3 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and an outbuilding I'd made as a workshop when I still hoped to do carpentry in retirement. "We have an offer, a very favorable one for everyone," Trixie interjected, and I noticed Lilith wince slightly. "We want you to sign the house over to Austin, officially, and in return, You can live in the annex. We'll renovate it, make a separate entrance. You'll have your own space, and we'll be there if you need anything." I looked at them and thought they had rehearsed that speech. I wondered how many times. "Why do you want my house?" I asked bluntly. Austin squirmed. Trixie squeezed his knee tighter. "Dad, you know real estate prices are going up. Our apartment is getting cramped and the neighborhood here is nice. School's for Lilith." "Lilith is 22. She's a college graduate," I reminded him. "I meant, in the future. If we have more kids," Austin stammered, and I saw Trixie throw a warning look at him. "They're in their 40s plus. What more kids?" "We're having financial difficulties right now, Dad," Austin finally admitted. "Investments haven't paid off, car loan, mortgage. If we had our own house, we could—" "Get back on our feet," Trixie finished for him. "It's a temporary solution. In a few years, when our affairs are settled, we could, you know." I understood. They'd never give me my house back. But I also understood that my savings were melting away. Health insurance doesn't cover half the medications I'm prescribed. My pension was barely enough to pay my bills. And then there's this house. It's full of ghosts. Sometimes I wake up in the night and hear Vivian humming in the kitchen, or I think I hear little Austin running down the hallway again. "I'll think about it," I said then. They left with smiles, confident they had won. 2 days later, I told Lloyd about everything. We were sitting in our usual coffee shop. Lloyd looked older than his years that day. The wrinkles seemed deeper. His hands trembled more than usual. "Don't do this, Abby," he said, setting the cup aside. "Once you sign the papers, you'll become dependent on their goodwill, and I don't think Trixie has much of it. That's my son, Lloyd, who visits you once a month, and that's on duty. When was the last time you saw him call just to see how you're doing?" I didn't answer. We both knew the answer. "You have a studio downtown," Lloyd continued. "You could sell the house and move there, or keep renting it out and make some extra income. That's true. I have a small studio on Western Avenue that Vivian and I bought 20 years ago as an investment. I rent it out to a young couple, and Lloyd helps with the paperwork and stuff. Austin doesn't know about it. It's been a secret between Vivian and me, a little insurance for a rainy day." "It's not about the money, Lloyd," I admitted. "It's just, I'm tired of being alone. Maybe if they moved in, it wouldn't be so quiet." Lloyd shook his head. He'd never been married, always saying bridges were his only passion. It's hard for him to understand my loneliness. "Your decision, Abby. But remember, once you give them the house, there's no turning back." I thought about it for 2 weeks. Every morning I woke up thinking about saying no, and every night I went to bed leaning toward agreement. In the end, it wasn't me who made the decision, but my loneliness. Austin made an appointment at the notary's office for Wednesday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He was punctual as always. Trixie arrived separately, arriving 10 minutes late, enough to demonstrate her busyness, but not enough to disrupt the meeting. The notary's office was sterile and impersonal. Beige walls, standard furniture, artificial plants in the corner. The female notary, Paige Barrington, spoke in a monotone, as if she were reading out the weather forecast. She explained the details of the transaction, made sure I understood the implications, and placed the paperwork in front of me. "Everything all right, Mr. Hobbs?" she asked when I didn't immediately pick up the pen. "Yeah, just a second." I looked at Austin. He was smiling, but his eyes remained cold. Trixie was checking her phone under the table, thinking I couldn't see. I thought about what Austin's dad would say. Lloyd's right, he wouldn't approve. But he's not here, and I am. And I'm 75 years old, most of my life already lived. I signed it. 4 signatures on 4 different pages. With each signature, I felt something leaving me, not just the legal rights to the house, but something more fundamental. Maybe dignity, maybe independence, maybe a final connection to Vivian. "Congratulations on completing the transaction," Miss Barrington said, sealing the documents with her seal. Austin shook my hand as if we'd just made a lucrative business deal. Thanks, Dad. You won't regret it. Trixie finally got off the phone and faked a smile. Yes, Ebner, you made the right decision. We're going to turn the annex into a real studio apartment. You're going to love it. I nodded and walked out of the office into the bright sunlight, feeling strangely empty. 43 years in this house. And now it wasn't mine anymore. On my way home, no, not home anymore, but to the Austin house where I'm graciously allowed to live, I stopped at a park and sat down on a bench. An elderly couple was feeding pigeons, laughing and talking. I watched them and thought about Vivian. What would she say now? Would she approve of my decision? You did what you thought was right, Ebner, she'd probably say, as always. But for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I'd done the right thing. I had a lingering feeling that I had just willingly signed the verdict of my old life, and that the new life that awaited me in the annex of the house now owned by Austin and Trixie might not be what they promised. I pulled out my phone and dialed Lloyd's number. He answered after the second beep. I signed, I said without preamble. A long pause followed. I see, he finally replied. And how does it feel? Like I didn't sell a house, but a part of myself. That's exactly what it feels like, Abby. That's exactly what it feels like. I hung up the phone and sat in the park for another long time, looking at the cars going by and the people passing by. All of them were in a hurry to get somewhere. All of them had a purpose, and I had just given away the only thing I had left. And now I had to get on with my life. They moved in a week after the papers were signed. The truck with their belongings arrived early in the morning, waking me up with a loud honk. I watched from the window as the movers hauled boxes, furniture, fancy things I didn't even know the names of. Trixie commanded the process, telling them what to carry and where to carry it, occasionally putting her phone to her ear to argue with someone. Austin didn't show up until lunchtime, when most of the work was done. By then I had already moved most of my stuff into the outhouse. Not that I had much: clothes, books, tools, a few photo albums. All that was left of a 75-year life fit into a dozen cardboard boxes. The outhouse wasn't so bad. I'd built it myself 20 years ago as a workshop, so I knew the foundation was solid, the walls were well insulated, and the roof didn't leak. But living in it was a different story. One room, a small bathroom, a tiny kitchen area. It was as if life had decided to remind us that towards the end we were going back to where we started. Minimalism by choice. That evening, Trixie knocked on my door. She looked tired, but there was some feverish excitement in her eyes. Ebner, I was wondering if you wouldn't mind if we replaced the living room furniture. That old couch and chairs. They don't fit our concept. Their concept was unknown to me, but I guessed that my shabby but comfortable furniture didn't fit into it. I shrugged. The house is yours now. Do what you want. Trixie wrinkled her nose slightly. She'd expected resistance, maybe even wanted it. Wonderful. One more thing. Your tools are in the garage. Can you move them over here? Austin wants to set up a home gym in there. I'll move it tomorrow, I replied. She nodded and was about to turn to leave, but stopped suddenly. You know, Ebner, we really appreciate what you've done for us. We really do, and we want you to feel at home. That's funny, I remarked, unable to help myself. I used to be home. Her smile became strained. Well, times change. I'll see you at dinner. 7. Don't be late. Their first dinner together was tense. Austin talked about work, some deals, clients, metrics. Trixie inserted comments about her successes in tax consulting. Lilith was silent, picking at her plate. I tried to follow the conversation, but I felt like an outsider, like I'd accidentally found myself at someone else's table. What did you do today, Dad? Austin suddenly asked, as if he'd just remembered my presence. Fixing up the outhouse, hanging shelves, putting things away. Oh, by the way, Dad, those old pictures on the wall in the hallway, we took them down. Austin said, spearing a piece of chicken. They don't go with the new wallpaper Trixie picked out. Old pictures? I felt something squeeze inside. You mean family photos? My mom and I's wedding pictures? Yeah, they're horribly faded, Trixie interjected. I put them in a box in the pantry. You can have them if you want them. I set my fork aside. My appetite was gone. Yes, I'll take them. Grandpa, I can help you hang them in the outhouse. Lilith suddenly raised her voice. I have a hammer and nails. Thank you, little one. I smiled gratefully at her. But I've got tools. I can handle it. If you decide to hang pictures in there, you better use special hooks that won't damage the walls, Trixie said immediately. The outhouse will have to be sold with the house someday, and holes in the walls will lower the value. I looked at her. Are you planning on selling the house? Not right now, of course, Austin answered quickly. But in the future, who knows? Real estate is a good investment. That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. The mattress was new. Austin had insisted on buying it, saying my old bed wouldn't fit in the annex. Maybe he was right, but this new mattress was too soft, and my back was whining. I lay in the dark, listening to unfamiliar sounds, the muttering of the TV in the main house, the muffled voices of Austin and Trixie, the sound of water in the pipes. It was all strangely foreign, even though it was happening in the house where I'd lived most of my life. The following days established a certain rhythm. I woke up early, a habit developed over decades. I'd go out on the small porch of the outhouse, drink coffee, and watch the morning bustle of the neighbors. Then Austin and Trixie would leave for work, and the house would be empty until evening. Sometimes Lilith would come over. She was looking for work at the local papers, trying to find a position as an aspiring journalist, and she had a lot of free time on her hands. We sat on the porch, talking. She'd show me her articles she'd written back in college, and I'd honestly tell her what I thought. She was talented, able to see stories where others saw only facts. Grandpa, aren't you lonely here? She asked one day. No more lonely than in a big house, I replied. Loneliness doesn't depend on the size of the room. She looked at me thoughtfully. Mom says you should be grateful that they let you stay. I hummed. Interesting wording. I gave them the house in exchange for the promise that I could live here. It was a bargain, not charity. I know, Lilith said quietly. I told them it was wrong, but they never listened to me. On the 5th day, I noticed that my old rocking chair had disappeared from the veranda. It had been replaced by some modern metal chair that looked like a torture device. When I asked Trixie about it, she shrugged. It didn't fit in with the exterior. We put it away in the basement. That chair was made by my father. It stood on this porch for 40 years, I said, trying to speak calmly. I'm sorry, Ebner, but times change. You can't live in the past, she replied with fake sympathy. I didn't bother to argue. Instead, I quietly went down to the basement that evening and moved the chair into the outhouse. It took up almost a quarter of the available space, but it was worth it. Sitting in it was like being home again. A week later, the upgrades began in earnest. They replaced my old stove with some ultra-modern induction model that I didn't even understand how to turn on. Threw out all of Vivian's pots and pans, replacing them with a set of shiny aluminum monstrosities. Took down the curtains that Vivian sewed with her own hands and hung blinds. Each such change was a small death. Pieces of my past life disappeared one by one, replaced by faceless fashion seen in interior design magazines. One day I came back from the store and found that my old desk that stood in the corner of the living room was gone. In its place was some kind of glass console table. Where's my desk? I asked Trixie, who was arranging decorative pillows on the new couch. Oh, that old monster, we put it up for sale. Someone has to pick it up tomorrow. You what? I couldn't believe my ears. There were my things in the drawers. Papers, letters. We took everything out and put it in a box. She waved her hand toward the pantry. You can check it out if you want. I found the box a small cardboard shoebox. It contained only a fraction of what was stored in the desk. There were no letters to Vivian, which I reread on particularly lonely evenings. There was no diary I'd kept for the past 10 years. There was no my grandfather's pocket watch that I wanted to give to Lilith on her 25th birthday. It's not all here, I said, turning back to Trixie. She didn't even look up. We threw out the old papers. They were just gathering dust, and some old clocks Austin took for himself said they were family heirlooms. I silently walked back to the outhouse and called Lloyd, told him what was happening. "Abby, this is just the beginning," he said grimly. "They're erasing your presence from the house. It won't be long before it reaches you yourself. Don't be dramatic. They're just updating the interior. Call it whatever you want, but be prepared for the worst." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down, I knew he was right. I was becoming a ghost in my own home, visible but misplaced. 2 weeks after they moved in, Trixie announced a big family dinner. "I've invited my parents and sister," she said. "They want to see our new home." Our. That word cut the ear, but I just nodded. What else could I do? That evening I put on my best sweater and pants, combed my hair, and even spritzed on the cologne Lilith had given me last Christmas. I wanted to look presentable in front of Trixie's relatives. The living room had been transformed beyond recognition. New furniture, new wallpaper, new paintings on the walls, abstract spots that modern designers think should symbolize something. Nothing of my old life remained. Even the old fireplace where Vivian and I used to spend winter evenings was covered with some fancy screen. Trixie's parents turned out to be nice people Robert and Elaine Page, both retired former school teachers. Her sister, Caroline, worked for a travel agency and talked a lot about her trips. They were politely interested in my life, and I told them a little about the bridges I was designing. Robert even showed genuine interest, asking about technical details. Things were going relatively smoothly until Elaine said, "What a beautiful house. You're lucky Ebner decided to give it to you." Trixie pursed her lips. "Well, it was a logical decision. It's hard for Ebner to maintain such a large house at his age." "I was coping," I pointed out. "Sure you did, Dad," Austin smiled indulgently. "But now you don't have to worry about paying bills, making repairs. You can just relax and enjoy a well-deserved vacation." "In the annex," I added. An awkward pause hung. "Speaking of age," Trixie said suddenly, too chipper for a natural transition. "A client of mine recently placed her father in a wonderful nursing home, Sunny Acres. The facilities there are excellent. His own room, 3 meals a day, medical staff around the clock." "Why would I need a nursing home?" I interrupted. "I have a home. An annex," I corrected myself, noticing her look. "Of course, that's not an issue right now," she said quickly. "But in the future, there's a community there, other people your age. It's not as lonely as it is here." "Mom, stop it," Lilith suddenly intervened. She'd been sitting quietly all evening, but now her eyes were sparkling. "Grandpa isn't going to a nursing home. He gave you his house on the condition that he could live in the annex. Remember?" "Lilith, adults talk," Trixie cut her off. "And no one's talking about moving in immediately. It's just an option for the future." "Option?" Lilith raised her voice. "You threw out half of his stuff, remodeled the house so there's nothing left of his grandmother in it, and now you want to get rid of him yourself?" "Watch your mouth, young lady." Austin pounded his palm on the table. "We're taking care of Grandpa. It's for his own good. His good is to be at home, with a family that respects him." Lilith jumped up from the table. "Not with people who only see him as a nuisance." "Sit down and apologize," Austin barked. "I won't." Lilith grabbed her bag. "Grandpa, let's get out of here. You can stay with me until you find another place." I was touched by her protectiveness, but I knew her small rented apartment could barely accommodate herself. I shook my head. It's okay, Lilith, I'll stay. But Grandpa, I'll manage, I said firmly. Lilith threw her parents a scornful look and ran out of the room. The front door slammed. I apologize for my daughter's behavior, Austin said to Trixie's parents. Teenage maximalism. She's 22, I pointed out. You know what I mean, Austin brushed it off. The rest of dinner passed in strained conversation. As soon as the guests left, Trixie turned to me. See what you've done? Turned Lilith against us. I didn't do anything, I replied calmly. She just sees what's going on. And what's going on? Austin asked threateningly. You're erasing every trace of my existence from the house I built, and it looks like the next step will be to erase myself. Don't be dramatic, Dad. Austin rubbed his temples. We just want the house to reflect us, our family, and yes, maybe you'd be better off among people your own age. But that's all in the future. How far in the future? I asked. He didn't answer. I went back to the annex and sat down in the rocking chair. In the darkness of the room, it seemed the only familiar, friendly object. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Lloyd's number. How was the great family dinner? He asked in lieu of a greeting. Trixie offered to send me to a nursing home, I replied. A long pause. Then, what are you going to do, Abby? Nothing for now. We'll see how things develop. They won't stop, Lloyd warned. A nursing home today, tomorrow. Who knows? You have to think about your options. What options? I gave them the house. Legally, I'm on a bird's-eye basis here. You have a studio, Lloyd reminded him. The tenant's contract expires in a month. They don't plan to renew. I wondered. The studio is small, but it's mine. No one there would throw out my stuff or tell me I was superfluous. I'll think about it, I said finally. Think faster, Abby. I know Trixie. She's the kind of person who always gets what she wants. And right now she wants a house without you in it. I knew he was right. Still, part of me clung to the naive hope that Austin wouldn't let this go too far. After all, I'm his father. That should count for something. But when I went to bed and closed my eyes, I saw Austin's cold, calculating gaze at me during dinner, and I realized that to him, I'd stopped being a father the moment I'd signed the deed to the house. After the family dinner, the tension in the house became palpable. Trixie stopped even pretending to be polite, casting irritated glances at me whenever I appeared in the main house. Austin avoided me, leaving early and returning late. Only Lilith would stop by, bring food she'd cooked herself, and sit with me on the porch of the outhouse, talking about her attempts to get a job in journalism. Sent an article to the Baldwin Park Tribune, she'd say, dangling her feet like a child. It's an investigative piece about funding cuts to libraries. The editor said it was strong, but not in the format of the publication. Translation. Too smart for the local paper, I remarked, and she laughed. We were interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. Trixie stood on the threshold, folding her arms across her chest. Lilith, can I speak to Grandpa alone? My granddaughter cast a questioning look at me. I nodded. It's okay, sweetie. Go on. Lilith reluctantly left, and Trixie walked into the annex, looking around with poorly concealed disgust. Ebner, Austin and I have decided to convert the annex into a home office, she said without preamble. With remote work, we need more space, and your room is perfect. I slowly rose from the rocking chair. Where do you think I'll be living? She shrugged as if it was an insignificant question. We were thinking about a room in the basement. There's a window there. We could put a bed. Basement? I couldn't believe my ears. You want a 75-year-old man living in a damp basement? We'll install a dehumidifier, she quickly added, and a heater in the winter. I stared at her, trying to figure out if she really didn't see anything wrong with her offer or if she just didn't care. The deal was, I live in the annex, I said firmly. Not in the basement, not in the barn, not in the dog box. In the annex. Her face hardened. Look, Ebner, Let's be honest, you're in the way. When we moved here, we were hoping for a new beginning for our family, but instead we keep running into reminders of the past, of your past. This house is my past, I replied. I built it, lived in it for 40 years, raised your husband here. And now it's ours, Trixie retorted. You gave it away yourself, which means you have to accept the consequences. I didn't answer. What was there to say? Think about it, she tossed, heading for the exit. Or find another option. You've got a week. In the evening, Austin returned. I waited for him on the front porch of the main house, sitting in the dark. When his car pulled into the driveway, I turned on the flashlight on my phone. He flinched when he saw me. Dad, what are you doing out here in the dark? Waiting for you, I replied. We need to talk. Austin sighed, running a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd adopted from me. If this is about the outhouse, Trixie already explained everything. Not everything, I rose. I want to hear from you. Are you really going to evict your father to the basement? He didn't look me in the eye. Dad, it's just a practical decision. We need an office. You could make an office in any of the 3 bedrooms in the house, I interrupted. Or in the living room. Or in the basement, for crying out loud. Why the outbuilding exactly? Because it's separate, he suddenly blurted out. Because there you won't be constantly looming in front of my eyes, reminding me of everything. I backed away as if from a blow. Reminding me of what, Austin? That I'm your father. That this house was yours, his voice trailed off. About how everything here once belonged to you. About how even now that the house is legally ours, you still think of it as yours. Because I built it, I said quietly. For you and your mom. And you never let me forget it. He finally looked into my eyes, and I saw something cold, foreign in them. All my life, you've been the great builder, the engineering genius, and I've just been your son. Never good enough, never smart enough. I never thought that, I objected. I was always proud of you. Not true, he shook his head. When I said I was going into finance instead of engineering, you were disappointed. I could see it in your eyes. You thought it was a waste of time. I wanted stability for you. You wanted me to be like you, he interrupted. But I'm not you, Dad. And this house is mine now. And I want it to reflect me, my family, not be a museum in memory of Ebner Hobbs. I looked at my son and saw a stranger in front of me. Where is the little boy who asked me to tell him a bedtime story? Where is the teenager I was teaching to drive? Where was the young man I was helping pick out his first suit for a job interview? What are you trying to say, Austin? I asked bluntly. He took a deep breath, straightened up. I'm saying you're not needed here anymore, Dad. Your time has passed. Now it's our turn to live, and your presence gets in the way. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd expected something like this, but to hear it so bluntly from my own son. I get it, I said after a long pause. Give me a couple days to find somewhere to go. Sure, he nodded, not showing the slightest bit of regret. Trixie said a week. I won't rush it. With those words, he walked past me into the house, leaving me alone in the dark. I'd been up all night, lying on the narrow bed in the outhouse, looking up at the ceiling and thinking about how everything had gone wrong. Where had I gone wrong in raising my son? When had this coldness, this indifference to his father settled in him? I called Lloyd in the morning and told him about the conversation with Austin. I won't say I warned you, Lloyd said after a pause, but I did warn you. Thanks for the encouragement, I grinned bitterly. Listen, Abby, the tenants moved out of your studio 3 days ago. I was just about to tell you. It needs a little cleaning up, but it's livable. I have the keys. I wondered. The studio was small, only about 30 square feet with a tiny kitchen and bathroom. But it was mine, and there would be no one there to tell me I was an extra. I'll stop by to get the keys today, I decided. Back in the annex, I started packing. There wasn't much. Clothes, a few books, tools, photo albums. Everything that was left of my life fit into 4 cardboard boxes. I was just finishing packing the last one when the door opened. Trixie stood on the threshold, and the look on her face didn't bode well. "What's this?" She pointed at the boxes. "My stuff. I'm leaving," I replied calmly. "Already?" There was surprise in her voice. She had expected a struggle, resistance. My surrender confused her. "Yes, found a place to live." "Oh," she stepped from foot to foot. "Well, good. Then, we need to vacate the annex as soon as possible. Workers are coming today to start the renovations." "Today?" Now it was my turn to be surprised. "Have you already planned everything?" "Of course," she shrugged. "We knew you'd agree." "Or what?" I raised an eyebrow. She didn't answer, but her look said it all for her. They were ready to force me out if they had to. "Give me a couple hours," I said. "I'll get my stuff and leave." "Fine," she nodded and turned to leave, but stopped suddenly. "One more thing, Ebner. Those things you left in the pantry of the main house, we need storage space, so—" "You threw them out," I finished for her. "Not everything," she said quickly. "We packed the most important things into trash bags. They're in the yard, by the garage." With those words, she walked out, leaving the door open, a clear hint that I had to go. I carried the boxes to my old car, a shabby Buick that Trixie had always considered a disgrace to their driveway. Then went to the garage, where I found 3 black garbage bags. Opening the first, I saw my winter sweaters that Vivian had knitted for me years ago. In the second were books, old engineering textbooks, novels I'd collected over decades. In the third were photo albums. I opened one at random and saw a wedding photo of Vivian and me. We were so young, so full of hope. I was squatting by the open bags when I heard footsteps behind me. "Grandpa?" It was Lilith. "What's going on?" I turned to her, not trying to hide the packages. "I'm leaving, little girl. Your parents have decided it's time for me to go." Her face contorted with anger. "They can't. This is your house." "Not anymore." I stood up, shaking off my knees. "I signed the papers, remember?" "But they promised you could live in the annex." "Promises change." I tried to smile, but it didn't come out well. "Don't worry about me. I have somewhere to live." "Where?" She grabbed my arm like she was afraid I'd disappear. "Remember the studio on Western Avenue? The one my grandmother and I bought as an investment? I'm going to live there." "One room?" She frowned. "Grandpa, it's mine," I said firmly, "and no one will tell me I'm an extra there." Lilith hugged me, and I could feel her trembling. "I'll visit you. Every day." "You don't have to fight with your parents over me," I stroked her head. "They're still your family." "You're my family too," she said stubbornly. "And I'm not going to let them just throw you out of their lives." At that moment, a van labeled Jenkins Repair Works pulled into the driveway. 2 workers got out of the vehicle and headed toward the house. "They've already called in the repairmen?" Lilith couldn't believe her eyes. "They didn't even wait for you to leave." "That's life, little girl." I picked up the bags of stuff. "Will you help me carry these to the car?" We loaded up the rest of our stuff, and I looked back at the house one last time. How strange. I'd lived here for almost half my life, and now I was leaving with 4 boxes and 3 garbage bags. "Wait, Grandpa." Lilith suddenly ran toward the house and returned a minute later with a small wooden box. "Your watch. I took it from my father's dresser." I took the box. It contained my grandfather's pocket watch, the very one I wanted to give to Lilith. "Thank you, little one. They were meant for you. You'll give them to me later." She kissed my cheek. "When you're 100 years old." I laughed, for the first time in days. "Deal." As I pulled out of the driveway, I noticed Austin standing at the living room window. He was looking at me, but didn't come out to say goodbye. I raised my hand in a parting gesture, but he turned away and pulled the curtain. The studio on Western Avenue looked better than I remembered. The tenants, a young couple of artists, kept it clean and had even painted the walls a nice bluish color. The room was small but with a large window overlooking a quiet courtyard. The kitchen was the size of a closet, and the bathroom barely fit a shower stall, but everything worked. Lloyd helped me move my stuff in and even brought groceries, bread, milk, eggs, coffee. "Get settled in," he said, looking around the room. "It's cramped in here, but it's mine," I finished for him. "And no one's going to throw my stuff away." "Exactly," he patted my shoulder. "Call me if you need anything." The first night in the studio was strange. I lay on the fold-out couch that served as my bed and listened to unfamiliar sounds. The hum of the elevator in the hallway, the muffled voices of my neighbors, the noise of cars from the street. It was so unlike the quiet nights in my Baldwin Park home. But there was also something soothing about this anonymity. Here I was, just an older man in a small studio. Not a father who had been kicked out of his own home. Not a former owner who had become a burden. Just a man living his life. I spent the next 2 days setting up the studio. I hung a few photos, arranged the books on the only shelf, arranged the clothes in the small closet. Lilith came every day bringing home-cooked food and city news, carefully avoiding mention of her parents. On the 3rd day after I moved in, as I was drinking my morning coffee by the window, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello? Mr. Hobbs." The voice sounded vaguely familiar. "This is Roger Finch, your neighbor on Fairview Avenue." Roger lived 2 houses down from us, an elderly retired librarian with whom we sometimes exchanged books. "Hello, Roger. What can I do for you?" "Mr. Hobbs, there was a fire at your son's house tonight." I froze with my cup halfway to my mouth. "A fire? How serious?" "Pretty serious." His voice sounded grim. "The fire department said it started with the electrical wiring in the west wing of the house. That's where the outbuilding is." The outbuilding. I felt a chill run down my back. That was where I'd warned Austin about the wiring problems a year ago. The old wires laid in the 70s needed replacing. I'd planned to tackle it last summer, but Vivian's illness had pushed back all plans. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, feeling my throat dry up. "Yes, thank goodness. The alarm woke them up and they managed to get out. But the house—" "I'm sorry, Mr. Hobbs, but the west wing is completely destroyed and the rest of it is badly damaged by smoke and water." I sat up, my legs suddenly refusing to hold me up. The house I had built with my own hands, in which I had lived for 40 years, in which Vivian had died, had burned down. "Thanks for letting me know, Roger," I said at last. "You're welcome, Mr. Hobbs. I thought you should know. They're at the Pine Branch Motel on the highway right now. You might want to come visit." I thanked him and hung up. For a while, I just sat there, staring into space. A strange numbness swept over me. I should have felt grief, loss, maybe even schadenfreude. After all, I had warned about the wiring. But instead, I felt only emptiness. The phone rang again. This time, it was Lilith. "Grandpa, did you hear?" Her voice trembled. "Yes, just now. Roger called. Are you okay?" "I was at a friend's house," she sobbed. "Woke up to my mom calling. They lost everything, Grandpa. All the stuff. Everything." "The important thing is that everyone's alive," I said, surprised at my own calm. "Things can be replaced." "A house can't be replaced," she said quietly. "All your memories, The memories are here." I tapped my finger on my temple. "Not in the walls." There was a pause, and then Lilith said something I already understood. "They didn't insure the house properly, Grandfather. Father said something about minimum coverage, saving on premiums. They won't be able to rebuild it completely." I sighed. Typical Austin, saving money on things you can't save money on. "What are they going to do?" "I don't know," she was quiet. "Mom said they could stay at her parents' place, but there's not much room. And Dad, he said he'd call you. I grinned. Of course he'll call, now that they need help. Grandpa, Lilith started, but I interrupted her. It's okay, little one. I'm not mad, it's just ironic. After talking to Lilith, I went out for a short walk. I needed to think, to clear my head. The area around Western Avenue was busy. Small cafes, stores, bakeries. People were going about their business, oblivious to an elderly man wandering about with no particular purpose. 3 days ago, I was kicked out of the house I built. They said I was no longer needed, and now that house was gone. And something told me that very soon the phone would ring and Austin would be saying very different words. The call came later that evening. I had just finished sorting through the last box of stuff when the phone screen flashed Austin's name. I stared at the blinking display, feeling a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times over the past few years had I waited for him to call, hoping he'd call just to see how I was doing? Finally, I answered. Dad? His voice sounded broken, which was rare for the always confident Austin. Do you already know what happened? Yeah, Roger called. Lilith too, I replied, trying to speak evenly. Are you all in one piece? No one's hurt? Not physically, he tried to laugh, but it came out more like a sob. But we lost almost everything, Dad. The fire department said the west wing of the house was completely destroyed, and the rest of it was smoke, water from the fire hoses. Yeah, I heard. I sat down on the edge of the fold-out couch. It's scary that it all happened so fast. You know what the ironic thing is? His voice shook. The fire started right where our home studio was supposed to be, the place we evicted you from. I didn't answer. There was no point in saying, I told you so. Austin knew I was talking about wiring problems. Dad, I need your help, he finally squeezed out. We're in a motel right now, but it's temporary. Insurance. Well, I saved a little on the premiums and the coverage was minimal. We'll get some money, but not enough to completely rebuild the house. So, what do you suggest? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. We could maybe stay with you for a while, until we decide what to do next? I looked around the tiny studio, 30 square meters, including the bathroom and kitchenette. A fold-out couch, a small table, 2 chairs, a bookshelf. Even for one person, the space was minimal. Austin, there's no place for 3 adults to live here, I said. It's a studio, not a house. A studio? Confusion sounded in his voice. What studio? Where are you? I realized he hadn't even considered where I'd moved to. To him, I had simply disappeared. I have a small studio on Western Avenue. Your mom and I bought it as an investment 20 years ago. I used to rent it out, and now I live here on my own. There was a long pause. I could almost hear the gears clicking in Austin's head, processing the new information. Do you have an apartment? He finally asked. All this time you've had an apartment and you didn't tell us? You never asked, I replied simply. But why didn't you tell us when we offered to take the house? You could have just moved in there. Because you didn't offer to move in. You offered me to live in the annex, I reminded him. And I agreed to it. That was the deal. And then you broke it. A pause again, then. Look, Dad, I know that what I did was wrong. The whole thing was wrong. I was angry, hurt. I don't know what came over me. But now we're in trouble, and we need help. Austin, I really can't accommodate you here. It's physically impossible. But you can help with money? A pleading note appeared in his voice. We could rent something temporarily, and then when we get insurance... Call me tomorrow, I said, suddenly feeling tired. I need to think about it. I hung up without waiting for an answer. Then I called Lloyd and told him about the conversation with Austin. He didn't even know where you lived, Lloyd said thoughtfully. 3 days went by and he didn't even inquire. And now he wants money, I sighed. You know the strangest thing, Lloyd? I don't feel any gloating or satisfaction, only fatigue. You're too good a person, Abby. I could hear the sadness in Lloyd's voice. "But don't let them use you again. You deserve better." After talking to Lloyd, I couldn't sleep for a long time, lying on the couch looking up at the ceiling and thinking about the house that was gone. It was strange. I'd lived there almost half my life, but now, picturing its charred walls, I felt only a detached sadness, as if I'd read about a fire in someone else's house in a newspaper article. In the morning, I was awakened by a knock at the door. Lilith stood on the doorstep with a bag from the bakery and 2 cups of coffee. "Breakfast for your favorite grandpa," she smiled, but I could see her eyes were red from crying. I let her in and she looked around curiously. "It's cozy in here. It's small, but yours." "Exactly." I took one of the cups. "Thanks for the coffee. How are you?" "Fine," she shrugged, sitting down in a chair. "Most of my stuff was at a friend's house. I stay at her place a lot. But my parents—" "Your dad called yesterday," I said, pulling scones out of the bag. "Wanted to live here." Lilith snorted. "You should have seen their faces when I told them you had your own apartment. Mom almost dropped the cup. They didn't know. Because they were never interested." She sipped her coffee. "Grandpa, they want to use you. Again." "What do you mean?" Lilith was silent, as if choosing her words. "I heard them talking in the motel last night. Thought I was asleep. Mom said that now that they knew about your apartment, you could invest in rebuilding the house. And Dad said you should do it since you warned about the wiring but didn't insist on repairs." I shook my head. Typical Austin, putting the responsibility on someone else. "And then Mom said," Lilith stammered. "She said that since you had money for the apartment, you should have savings, and that they'd find a way to convince you to help." "I see," I nodded. "Thanks for telling me, babe." "I don't want them to use you again." Tears glistened in her eyes. "They threw you away like an old thing, and now that they need the money—" "Hey," I took her hand. "Don't worry about me. I've been designing bridges for 40 years. I've learned to see when a structure is unreliable." She smiled weakly through her tears. "Are you sure you can handle it?" "Absolutely," I winked at her. "Now tell me, how's the job search going?" We spent the morning discussing her journalistic plans. She showed me a new article she was writing about the impact of local library closures on the education of underprivileged children. She had a talent for seeing the human side in seemingly dry topics. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time, it was Trixie. "Hi, Ebner." Her voice sounded unnaturally friendly. "How are you settling into your new place?" "Fine," I replied briefly. "That's great. Listen, Austin and I have been thinking, maybe we could stop by, just to talk, discuss the situation." I looked at Lilith, who rolled her eyes. "Okay, come by at 3. "Great. We'll be there." She disconnected without saying goodbye. "They're definitely up to something," Lilith said as I put the phone away. "Mom's never this nice for no reason." "We'll see," I shrugged. "Do you want to stay?" "I can't," she sighed. "I have a job interview at the paper at 2, but I can come back tonight." "You don't have to," I smiled. "I can handle your parents." After Lilith left, I cleaned up the studio, even though there was so little space that there wasn't much to clean. Then I called Lloyd and warned him of the upcoming visit. "Be careful," he said. "They're desperate, and desperate people are capable of many things." "What can they do? Take away my studio?" I grinned. "They didn't even know it existed." "Just don't sign anything," Lloyd warned me. "Not a single piece of paper." At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Austin and Trixie stood on the doorstep, both wearing clothes that were clearly borrowed. Austin in a sweater that was too big for him, Trixie in a blouse that didn't match her skirt. They looked rumpled, tired, but I noticed a familiar calculating glint in Trixie's eyes. "Daddy." Austin stepped forward, wrapping his arms around me. It was weird. We hadn't hugged in years. "Thanks for agreeing to meet." "Come on in." I stepped back, letting them into the studio. They entered looking around with poorly concealed disappointment. Clearly they were expecting something more. "Nice place," Trixie said with a fake smile. "Very compact. Have a seat." I pointed to 2 chairs by a small table. "Coffee?" "No thanks." Austin shook his head, settling into a chair. "Dad, we're here to talk about the situation." "I'm listening." I sat down on the edge of the couch across from them. "As you know, the house was badly damaged," Austin began. "The fire department said the old wiring in the west wing was to blame." "The same wiring I warned about a year ago," I pointed out. Austin wrinkled his nose. "Yeah, you were right. We should have listened, but it's too late to talk about it now." "The question is what to do next," Trixie interjected. "Insurance will only cover part of the damage. We don't have enough money for a full rebuild." "So you came to me for money," I finished for her. They exchanged a glance. "Not exactly," Austin said cautiously. "We thought maybe we could pool resources, a family solution." "What kind of solution?" Trixie pitched forward. "Ebner, we know what we've done to you. Not very well, but now we have a chance to make things right." "How?" "We could rebuild the house together," Austin said. "You'll put up your savings, we'll add insurance and what we can borrow. And when the house is rebuilt, we'll all live there, as a family." "Like we used to," Trixie added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I stared at them, not believing my ears. "You kicked me out of the house 3 days ago, said you didn't need me anymore, and now you want me to pay to rebuild the house and come back." "We realized our mistake," Austin said quickly. "The fire. It made us reevaluate our priorities. Family is what's important." "And you remembered that when you needed my money?" Trixie tensed but continued to smile. "Ebner, everyone makes mistakes. We admit ours. Don't you want to give us a chance to make it right?" I looked at them, my son and his wife sitting in front of me with expressions of fake remorse on their faces. Did they really think I would believe their sudden enlightenment? That I couldn't see the simple calculation behind those words? "How much do you need?" I asked bluntly. They glanced around again. "Preliminary estimate for recovery is about $300,000, Austin said. "Insurance will cover about $120. We have savings, another $50. That leaves about $130,000. $130,000, I repeated. "And you expect me to just give you that money?" "Not give it, but invest it," Trixie corrected. "Into our house together, our own house." "Which legally belongs to Austin," I pointed out. "We can change that," Austin said quickly. "Deed the house to all 3 of us, or even you, if you want. And we'll just live there like we used to." I struggled to hold back a chuckle. "Like before? You mean like 3 days ago when you threw my stuff out on the street?" "Dad, we've already said we're sorry." Austin's voice had a hint of irritation in it. "What else do you want to hear?" "The truth," I replied. "Not this prioritizing fairy tale, but the truth. You want my money. You lost your house because you didn't take my advice about wiring and saved money on insurance. And now you want me to solve your problem." Trixie's face contorted. "All right, yes, we need money. So what of it? You're our father. You have to help." "Should?" I raised an eyebrow. Interesting wording for a man who told me 3 days ago that I was no longer needed. "That was emotion," Austin exclaimed. "That's not what I meant." "No, that's exactly what you meant," I objected calmly. "You were very clear, son. I am no longer needed. My time has passed. Now it's your turn to live." Trixie stood up abruptly. "Look, Ebner, let's be honest. You have the money. We don't have any. We don't have a place to live. It's not fair." "Not fair?" I stood up as well. "What exactly isn't fair, Trixie? The fact that you can't get my money after throwing me out of my own home, or that your actions have consequences?" "We didn't throw you out," Austin protested. "We just wanted you to live in the basement." He paused, realizing how that sounded. In the basement, I repeated. A 75-year-old man to a damp basement. And now you're surprised I'm in no hurry to give you my life savings? Trixie clenched her fists. You're just getting revenge on us, enjoying our misery. No, Trixie. I shook my head. I'm not enjoying it. I'm just not going to let you use me anymore. Austin stood up as well, his face red with anger. Look, Dad, we came to you with an olive branch, offered to forget everything and start over, and you refused to help your own son. Help? I grinned. I gave you the house, Austin, the house I built with my own hands, the one I lived in for 40 years, the one your mother died in. I gave it to you because you said you needed help. And how have you repaid me? We made a mistake, he repeated stubbornly. People make mistakes. Yes, they do, I agreed. And I made a mistake when I thought I could trust you with the house I loved, when I believed that family was more than just a resource for you to use. Trixie grabbed the bag. This is useless. He's not going to help. Come on, Austin. But Austin didn't move, looking at me with an expression that was a mix of anger and despair. Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. Trixie has parents, I reminded her, and a sister. You have friends, co-workers. You're not on the streets. But it's not the same. We lost our home. So did I said quietly. 3 days ago. We looked at each other across the small room. My son, the man I'd once held in my arms, taught to ride a bike, comforted after nightmares. And now he was a stranger. Or maybe he always had been, and I just didn't want to see it. So, that's it then? He finally asked. You won't help us? I won't give you money to rebuild the house, I said firmly. But if you need temporary help, a small amount for rent until you get your insurance sorted out, I can help, provided you find your own solution to your problem. Trixie snorted. Handouts. No, Trixie, I looked her in the eye. It's called setting boundaries. You should try it. Austin hesitated, but Trixie tugged on his sleeve. Come on, he won't change his mind. They headed for the door, but at the threshold, Austin turned around. You're going to regret this, Dad. When you're alone in your old age, you'll regret pushing away the only family you have. I'm already alone, Austin, I replied calmly. You took care of that 3 days ago, and you know what? That's not so bad. The door slammed shut behind them, and I was left alone in the silence of the small studio. Strangely, instead of the expected heaviness or regret, I felt something akin to relief. It was as if the heavy weight I had been carrying for years had finally fallen from my shoulders. I walked over to the window and watched them get into the cab, Austin with tense shoulders, Trixie gesturing furiously, proving something to him. They were part of my life, but they weren't my life, and probably never had been. The phone rang. It was Lilith. Grandfather? How did it go? They left, I answered simply, without getting what they came for. I knew it, she sighed. They were trying to get you to pay for home repairs? Yes, and they wanted me to come back, like a family of one. What hypocrites! She was indignant. After all they've done. They're just desperate to find a solution, I said, surprised at my own calmness. How did your interview go? I got the job! Lilith's voice instantly perked up. A freelance reporter at the Tribune. It's not a full-time job, but they'll print my articles. Congratulations, baby girl. I was genuinely happy for her. I always knew you'd get your way. I'll come over tonight and we'll celebrate, she said. And grandfather, I'm proud of you for not letting them use you again. After talking to Lilith, I sat down in the rocking chair that by some miracle fit in the corner of the studio and felt at peace for the first time in a long time. The house I loved had burned down. The son I'd raised was a stranger, but I was alive, with a roof over my head, a granddaughter who loved me, and a friend who supported me. Maybe, at 75, I was finally starting a new chapter of life. And maybe it could turn out to be just as good as the previous ones, It had been a week since Austin and Trixie's visit. I hadn't heard anything from them. No calls, no messages. Lilith told me that they had moved in with Trixie's parents, taking over the guest bedroom. She said the atmosphere there was tense. Trixie was constantly fighting with her mother, and Austin spent most of his time at the office, staying late. "They forbade me to see you," Lilith said as we sat in a small cafe not far from my studio. "They said you ruined the family with your selfishness." I grinned. "And what did you reply?" "That I'm 22 and it's up to me to decide who I see," she smiled, sipping her coffee. "They were furious, especially my mom, said I was a traitor. I'm sorry I got you in trouble with your parents." I covered her hand with mine. "It's not because of you," Lilith shook her head. "It's because of them, because of their greed and selfishness. They wanted to use you, and when it didn't work out, they decided to make it their fault." I nodded, thinking about how much she'd matured recently. Perhaps this family drama had made her see her parents in their true light, not through the prism of childish adoration, but for who they really were. "How's your job at the paper going?" I asked, changing the subject. Her eyes lit up. "Great. They've already published my first article about the library closing, and the editor has given the go-ahead for the next one, about the problems with senior housing in Baldwin Park." "Sounds interesting." "Yeah, but I need help with the technical aspects. There's a part in there about building codes and safety regulations. Would you mind taking a look at it?" "Sure," I smiled. "I'd love to." That same evening, I called Lloyd and told him about Lilith's article. "You know, Abby, it got me thinking," he said after a pause. "You've been designing bridges for 40 years. You have experience that younger engineers don't have." "So what?" I didn't understand what he was getting at. "Remember Patrick Donovan, my former apprentice who now runs the engineering department at Bristol Construction?" "Vaguely," I admitted. "The tall guy with the red beard?" "That's the one," Lloyd grinned. "Anyway, I was talking to him the other day. They're working on the Greenfield River Bridge project right now, and they're having trouble with the calculations. I mentioned that I know the best bridge specialist in the Tri-County area. Lloyd, I'm 75. I'm retired." "So what of it? Your brain works better than most 30-year-olds. Patrick asked if you'd be willing to advise their team. For good money, of course." I wondered. The idea of going back to work, even part-time, hadn't crossed my mind. I was used to thinking of myself as a retired man, a man whose time had passed. But what if Lloyd was right? What if my experience is still valuable? "I'll think about it," I finally said. The next day I met Patrick Donovan in his office. He really turned out to be the red-bearded guy, although his beard was starting to gray. He showed me the design of the bridge, an ambitious cable-stayed structure that would connect the two banks of the Greenfield. "The problem is load distribution," he explained, laying out the blueprints. "The computer models show potential stress points, but we can't find an optimal solution." I studied the drawings, and a familiar feeling gripped me, the excitement of solving a complex problem, of being immersed in the world of calculations and structures. I hadn't felt this way in years. "The problem is here and here," I pointed to two places on the drawing. "You're using the standard tension factor for the cables, but because of the terrain and the direction of the prevailing winds, adjustments need to be made." Patrick listened intently, taking notes. When I finished my explanation, he nodded respectfully. "Wow, Lloyd wasn't exaggerating. You're seeing something we missed." 40 years of practice," I shrugged. "Mr. Hobbs, we'd really appreciate it if you'd agree to advise our team on a regular basis, say 2 or 3 days a week. Of course, we'd be willing to pay a competitive rate." I hesitated. It was an unexpected offer, but the more I thought about it, the more attractive it seemed. The opportunity to do what I loved again, to pass on experience to young engineers, to feel useful. "I'll take it," I said. "But on one condition. I work as an independent consultant, no long-term contracts, If at any point I decide I've had enough, I leave without commitment. More than fair, Patrick held out his hand. Welcome to the team, Mr. Hobbs. Thus began my new life. 3 days a week I'd come to the Bristol construction office, where I worked with a team of young engineers on a bridge project. They were smart guys, full of enthusiasm and new ideas, but they lacked practical experience. I filled that gap by sharing my knowledge, showing them in practice what they couldn't learn from textbooks. The rest of my time was devoted to setting up my studio. The small space required creativity. I made built-in shelves, maximizing the height of the walls. I installed a folding table that could be put away when I didn't need it. Hung some pictures on the walls, Vivian on our wedding day, little Austin on his bike, Lilith with her college degree. Lilith stopped by my house often, despite my parents' prohibition. She brought home-cooked meals, talked about her work at the newspaper, showed me drafts of articles. I helped her with the technical aspects, explaining complex engineering concepts in simple terms. "You know, Grandpa," she said one evening as we sat on the small balcony of my studio, looking out at the sunset, "I've never seen you so alive. Even in the big house you seem somehow extinguished. And now I feel useful again," I finished for her. Strange, isn't it? Losing the house turned out to be the best thing that's happened to me in years. "Not the house," she corrected. "A toxic relationship. You were a prisoner in your own home, Grandpa, and now you're free." I pondered her words. Perhaps she was right. I had clung to the house, to the past, to the idea of a family that had long since ceased to exist as I had envisioned it. It was only by losing it all that I was able to start over. It's been a month. I was fully immersed in the bridge work, relishing the opportunity to use my knowledge again. Lilith wrote more and more in-depth articles, and she began to be noticed in journalistic circles. We often discussed her work, and I could see her growing professionally with each new publication. I hardly heard of Austin and Trixie, except for occasional mentions in conversations with Lilith. They were still living with Trixie's parents, still angry with me. I had learned to accept that as fact, not letting it cloud my new life. Then one evening there was a knock on my studio door. I wasn't expecting company. Lilith was on assignment in a neighboring town. Lloyd had gone to visit his sister. When I opened the door, I saw Austin and Trixie. They looked different than last time, more collected, less desperate. Austin was in a business suit, Trixie in a slinky dress. They had clearly been preparing for this visit. "May I come in?" Austin asked without saying hello. I stepped back, letting them in. They entered, looking around with slight surprise. The studio had changed since their last visit, more cozy, more settled. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" I asked, not offering them a seat. "We have a proposal," Austin began without preamble. "A business proposition. I'm listening." "We found a way to rebuild the house," Trixie pitched forward. "Took out a loan from the bank. The work has already begun." "Congratulations," I nodded. "But what does this have to do with me?" "Directly." Austin pulled a file folder from his briefcase. "The loan is large and the terms are not the most favorable, but we have a plan. If you deed the house to yourself, we can refinance the loan at a much lower interest rate. The bank will give better terms to a retiree with a good credit history." I stared at them, not believing my ears. "You want me to take over your loan?" "Not exactly," Trixie said quickly. "Legally, the house will be yours. We'll live there together as a family. And after, well, you'll leave the house to us as an inheritance." "As originally planned," Austin added. "Everyone wins. You get to move back into your house, we get better loan terms. The bank has a reliable borrower." I sat on the edge of the couch trying to comprehend their offer. Did they really think I would take it? After everything that had happened? "And what's to stop you from kicking me out again once the papers are signed?" I asked bluntly. "Dad, we've already said we're sorry for what happened," Austin spread his hands. "It was a mistake. We acted emotionally. Besides, Trixie added, this time it will be official. We'll sign a residency agreement, a legally binding one. I looked at them, so confident, so calculating. They'd thought of all the details, prepared their arguments, even brought the documents. All for one thing, to use me again. No, I said. What? Trixie blinked, clearly not expecting such a direct rejection. I said no, I repeated. I won't deed the house to myself. I won't take over your loan, and I'm not coming back to live with you. But why? Austin looked genuinely puzzled. It's to everyone's advantage. Because I don't want to be a part of this relationship anymore, I replied calmly. You made it clear that I wasn't a father or grandfather to you, but a source of resources. When the resources ran out, you threw me away. And now that you've realized I can still be useful, you want me back. That's not true, Austin protested. We're family. No, Austin, I shook my head. Family doesn't throw each other out on the street. Family doesn't manipulate. Family doesn't use. You're just getting back at us, Trixie narrowed her eyes. Enjoying your little victory. I'm not getting revenge, I looked her straight in the eye. I'm setting boundaries, and one of those boundaries is to never let you use me again. They exchanged a look, clearly unprepared for this turn. They were sure their plan would work, that I would agree, out of a sense of duty, out of a desire to return home, out of a desire to rebuild my family. Well, that's too bad, Austin finally said, tucking the documents back into his briefcase. We were hoping for a more constructive conversation. Constructive conversation is only possible between equals, I replied. And you've never seen me as an equal, only an old man who should be grateful to be allowed to exist. Trixie stood up, adjusting her dress. Let's go, Austin. He won't change his mind. Austin stared at me for another second, as if trying to figure out what had gone wrong. Then he nodded and headed for the door. On the threshold, he turned around. Are you really willing to stay in this dog house when you can go back to a real house? I looked around my little studio, cozy, furnished, mine. This isn't a dog house, Austin. This is my home, a place where I'm respected. At least I respect myself. And yes, I'd rather stay here than go back to my real home where I'm considered a burden. He shook his head as if he couldn't understand my logic and walked out, closing the door behind him. I was left alone, but in a strange way I felt not devastated, but liberated. It was as if the last thread tying me to my past life had finally been severed, allowing me to fully immerse myself in the new one. The next day, Lilith returned from her business trip and came straight to see me. She was excited, eyes glistening with excitement. "Grandpa, you won't believe it," she exclaimed as soon as she crossed the threshold. "I've been assigned a big investigation about corruption in the construction business." "Congratulations," I was genuinely happy for her. "Tell me more about it." She sat down at her desk, pulled out her laptop and started showing me the materials she had already collected. It was about suspicious contracts won by one construction company, about substandard materials, about building code violations. "The problem is," she said, biting her lip, "I don't understand all these technical details. I don't understand where the violations really are and where they're just complicated technical decisions." I looked at my granddaughter, smart, determined, enthusiastic. She was so much like Vivian when she was young, the same determination in her eyes, the same passion for justice. "I'll help you," I said. "I have 40 years of experience in construction. I can explain the technical aspects, help you understand the documentation, point out the real violations." "Really?" Her face brightened. "You'd do that for me?" "Of course," I smiled. "We're family." For the next few weeks, we worked together on her investigation. I explained construction principles to her, helped her analyze documents, and pointed out inconsistencies in reports. She was quick to grasp, asking incisive questions, finding connections I'd missed. When the article was finished, the editor was impressed. "This is a strong piece, Lilith. Technically, competent, well argued. We'll put it on the front page of the Sunday edition." On the day of publication, Lilith and I sat in a small cafe, looking at the paper with her name on the front page. "Here's to your success." I lifted my cup of coffee. "To us," she corrected, tapping her cup. "It wouldn't have worked out without you." We drank our coffee in silence, savoring the moment of triumph. Then Lilith said, "You know, I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about home, about my parents, about you. And I realized one thing." "What's that?" "Sometimes loss isn't the end, it's the beginning. You lost your home, but you found yourself. A new purpose, a new meaning. You helped me find my way." I looked at my granddaughter, feeling pride overflow. "You're right, little girl. Sometimes you have to lose something important to realize what is truly valuable." We left the cafe and walked slowly down the street. It was a beautiful fall day. The sun was shining brightly but not hot. The trees were starting to change color and the air was fresh and clean. "What are you going to do next?" Lilith asked. "With my parents, I mean." I hesitated. "Nothing," I finally answered. "I won't seek a meeting, nor will I avoid one. If they want a real relationship, no manipulation, no taking advantage, I'm ready. If not, well, I've learned to live without them." Lilith nodded. "And I'll stay with you, no matter what they say. They're your parents, little one. Don't break off your relationship with them because of me." "I'm not breaking up," she shook her head. "I just don't let them control my life. Neither do you." We reached my house, the small apartment building that housed my studio. Nothing special, an ordinary house in an ordinary neighborhood. But for me, it became a symbol of a new life, a new freedom. "Want to come in?" I asked. "I have some ideas for your next investigation." "Sure," Lilith smiled. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." And we walked up the stairs, leaving the past behind and stepping into a future that, despite everything, seemed full of hope and new possibilities.